Welcome back to the night episode 5. If you are here, if you found your way back to this mansion, to this story, to Tony and Mr. Martin, then you already know what this is. You're about to find out that Mr. Martin is not what the city thinks he is, not what the legend says he is, what he actually is. And I think it is going to surprise you. If you are enjoying Night Shift, if this story has made you feel something, if you have found yourself thinking about these two people at odd moments, if you have told someone about them, please subscribe, leave a comment, tell us what you think is happening between them, tell us what you want to happen. We read everything and it means more than you know. Let's keep going. I found a room on a Friday. Not because I was looking for it. I want to be very clear about that, because by this point in my employment at Blackveil Mansion, I had developed a very healthy respect for the difference between things that were mine to find and things that were not. And I had been observing that difference carefully and consistently for weeks. I was not snooping. I was doing my job. The East Wing inventory had taken me further into that part of the mansion than I had been before, past the chaise longue I had developed feelings for, past the room full of covered paintings, past the corridor that turned left and then right, and then opened into a smaller hallway that I had assumed led to a storage room or a utility space or one of the many practical, unremarkable corners that every large old house accumulates over time. The door at the end of that hallway was unlocked. I know it was unlocked because every other door in that corridor was locked, and I had noted each one in my inventory clipboard with the word locked, written beside it in my neatest handwriting. And when I reached this door and put my hand on the handle with every intention of writing locked again, it opened, smoothly, completely, like it had been waiting. I should have written unlocked on my clipboard and moved on. I went inside. The room was not large, not by the standards of the rest of the mansion, which had spent several centuries accumulating space with the confidence of something that had never needed to justify its dimensions. This room was almost modest. A window on the far wall, dark outside, the city lights visible in the distance. A desk against one wall, cleared and clean. Bookshelves, but different from the library. These books were newer, more personal, the kind of books that belonged to a specific person rather than a collection, with cracked spines and folded corners, and the general appearance of things that had been read rather than kept. And on the desk, in a plain dark frame, a photograph. Not old, not black and white and worn soft at the edges the way the photograph in the library box had been. This one was recent, color, sharp and clear, and taken with the kind of camera that catches things exactly as they are without any of the softening that time and distance usually provide. Two men. Martin, younger, or not younger exactly. Martin's face did not seem to age in photographs, the way normal faces aged, but different. The difference was not in his face, it was in his expression. He was looking at the camera with something open in his eyes that I had never seen there in all the weeks I had been watching his face from careful 3-second intervals, not happy exactly. Something quieter than happy and more permanent. Something that looked like settled, like someone who had found the place they were supposed to be and knew it. The man beside him was laughing, caught mid-laugh, head tilted slightly back, eyes creased at the corners, one hand on Martin's shoulder, with the easy familiarity of someone who had stood beside this person many times and intended to stand beside them many more. I looked at that photograph for a long time, and then I heard footsteps in the hallway behind me, and I turned around, and Mrs. Adela was standing in the doorway. She did not look surprised to find me there. She looked like someone who had been expecting this moment and had been deciding for some time what she would say when it arrived. "Come and have tea," she said. We sat in the kitchen. She made the tea the way she always made it, precise and unhurried, and she put a cup in front of me and sat down across the table and folded her hands and looked at me with that expression that said she had assessed what I needed and had decided the time for saying nothing had passed. "His name was Junho," she said. I wrapped both hands around my cup. "They met when Mr. Martin was 26, she said. "Junho was an architect. He designed things that were meant to last. Buildings, structures, things built to outlive the people who made them. Mr. Martin used to say that was why they understood each other. because Martin also built things meant to last. His work, his systems, the way he ran this house, everything precise and permanent and constructed to endure. I looked at my tea. "What happened?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. Not the quietness of someone who does not want to answer, the quietness of someone choosing which words to use. "An accident," she said. 7 years ago, very sudden. The kind of thing that does not give you time to prepare or say what needs to be said, or any of the things you always assume you will have time for, because you have always had time before and you cannot imagine the moment when you will not. I sat with that. 7 years, I said. She nodded. "He closed everything after," she said. "The parts of the house that had been theirs together, the rooms they had used. He closed them, and he closed himself, and he let the city build whatever story it wanted to build about him, because the story kept people away, and people away meant nobody close, and nobody close meant—" She stopped. "Meant he could not lose anyone again," I finished. She looked at me. "Yes," she said, simply. "That is exactly what it meant." I thought about the gate that opened by itself, the lights that flickered in the east wing, the mansion that nobody entered and came back from. I thought about how carefully and completely a person could construct a wall if they were motivated enough, and how a wall that looked like a legend was the most effective kind because nobody tried to climb a legend. They just walked around it and left you alone inside it. He built all of it, I said. The reputation, the myth. "Not intentionally," she said, "not at first, but he stopped correcting it. And eventually it became true in the way that things become true when enough people believe them." She paused. "And then you arrived." I looked at her. "You were the first person in 7 years who came through that gate and did not leave," she said. "Not because you were not frightened. You were terrified. I could see it every evening for the first 2 weeks. But you kept coming back. And I think," she stopped again, choosing carefully, "I think he had forgotten that people could do that. Choose to stay even when they are frightened. Choose to come back." I did not say anything for a while. Outside the kitchen window, the city was dark and quiet, and somewhere in the upper floors of this house, the man in that photograph was sitting in his study doing whatever he did in the evenings when I was not there, which I had never thought about before and was now thinking about with a clarity that made my chest do something complicated. "Mrs. Adela," I said, "the photograph in the unlocked room, was that room unlocked before tonight?" She picked up her cup. "Not that I am aware of," she said. I thought about that. "I'm going to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to tell me the truth." She nodded. "Did he unlock it?" I said. "Did he unlock it and leave it for me to find?" She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that the silence itself was an answer. "He does not do things accidentally," she said finally. "This house, the way it runs, the way things are placed and ordered and maintained, nothing in it happens without intention. In 31 years, I have never seen him do anything without knowing exactly why he was doing it." I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after she went back to the stove. He had unlocked the room. He had left the photograph where I would find it. Not told me, not shown me, left it. The way you leave something for someone when you want them to know something, but you do not yet have the words to say it directly. The way you open a door and step back and let someone walk through it at their own pace. I thought about the key on my nightstand at home, small and plain and given to me without explanation, in a voice that said, "Shorter walk, safer at night," as though it were a practical matter and nothing more. I thought about "be here at 6 tomorrow." I thought about instant noodles and a laugh that was rusty from disuse. I was still thinking about all of it when I went upstairs at 9:30 to tell him the East Wing inventory was complete. The study door was open, which it was more often now, and he was at his desk, and he looked up when I appeared in the doorway, and something moved between us that neither of us named. "The inventory is done," I said. He nodded. "I found a room," I said. "At the end of the east hallway. The door was unlocked." He looked at me steadily. "Yes," he said. "I found a photograph," I said. He said nothing, just looked at me with that expression that was not unreadable anymore, not to me, Not after all these weeks of learning the geography of his face from careful intervals. I could read it now. I could see what was underneath the composure. The thing that was not quite ready to be spoken, but was moving toward being ready, slowly, the way things move when they have been very still for a very long time. "I know about Junho," I said quietly. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences, softer, like something that had been held very tightly, had been allowed to breathe. He looked at his desk for a moment, then back at me. "He would have liked you," he said, very quietly, almost to himself. I stood in the doorway of that study and felt the weight of what had just been handed to me and held it carefully, because it deserved to be held carefully, and said, "Tell me about him." And Mr. Martin, who did not do things without knowing exactly why he was doing them, who had unlocked a room and left a photograph, and been waiting, I think, for someone to ask that question for 7 years, told me, have been making a list, not on paper, in my head, the way I do with things I am still working out, turning them over and examining them from different angles until they make sense, or until I accept that they are not going to make sense, and file them under things I live with anyway. The list is of everything I believed about Blackveil Mansion when I first arrived, everything the city believed, everything Diana communicated with her eyes when she put down her coffee, and everything Marcus delivered with the authority of someone who had watched one too many documentaries and confused information with understanding. The gate that opens by itself, the lights that flicker in the east wing, the mansion nobody enters and comes back from, the most feared man in the city. I have been going through this list one item at a time and holding each one up against what I actually know now, after weeks of 6 to 11, after correspondence and inventories and instant noodles, and a laugh that was rusty from disuse, and a photograph left unlocked in a room at the end of a hallway. The gate that opens by itself, motion sensor, small black panel on the left stone pillar, installed in 2019 according to the maintenance records I found in the East Wing inventory, manufacturer's label still attached, completely ordinary technology, performing a completely ordinary function that in the dark and the fog of a first frightened evening looks like something it is not. The lights that flicker in the East Wing, old wiring. Mrs. Adela said so on my first week, and she was right. I found a junction box during the inventory. It needs replacing. I have actually added it to the maintenance list I started keeping, because someone in this house needed to start keeping one, and it was clearly going to be me. The mansion nobody enters and comes back from. I have been entering and coming back from it 5 evenings a week for weeks. Mrs. Adela has been entering and coming back from it for 31 years. The legend is not about the mansion. The legend is about what it costs to approach someone who has decided not to be approached, and most people look at that cost and decide it is not worth paying, and the ones who decide that outnumber the ones who decide otherwise by enough that the story writes itself. And the most feared man in the city, I'm going to tell you about the afternoon Martin showed me the rest of the house. It was a Saturday. He had never asked me to come on a Saturday before. Saturdays were not part of my hours. My hours were Monday through Friday, 6 to 11, clean and structured and professional. But he sent a message on Friday evening after I had left, a single line to the number Mrs. Adela had put in my phone on my second week for emergencies. It said, "If you're free tomorrow afternoon." That was the entire message. No question mark, no explanation of what tomorrow afternoon would involve. I sent back, yes. He met me at the front door at 2 in the afternoon, which was the first time I had ever been inside the mansion in daylight, and the daylight changed everything. The entrance hall that had felt gothic and shadowed and weighted with atmosphere in the evenings was in the afternoon simply a very large, very beautiful room with high ceilings and excellent natural light coming through windows I had never noticed because I had always arrived after dark. The dark wood paneling glowed warmly. The staircase curved upward, the same way it always curved, but without the dramatic shadows. It looked like what it was, an exceptionally well-made piece of craftsmanship in a house that had been built by people who understood quality. He was wearing black because he was always wearing black, but today it was a black sweater rather than a dress shirt, which was the most casual I had ever seen him. and it did something to the architecture of my thoughts that I was going to need to address at some point, but not right now. "Come," he said, "I want to show you something. We started at the top, the 3rd floor. The floor that does not exist as far as you are concerned." That was what he had said on my very first evening, standing behind his desk, giving me the rules in a voice that left no room for questions. And I had respected that. I had not gone to the 3rd floor. I had not asked about the 3rd floor. I had filed it under things that are not mine to know and left it there. He took me there himself. The staircase to the 3rd floor was narrower than the main staircase, tucked behind a door of the 2nd floor landing that I had always assumed was a cupboard. It opened onto a short corridor with a single door at the end, and Martin walked ahead of me and put his hand on the door and paused for just a moment, the pause of someone taking a breath before something, and then opened it. It was a studio. Large windows on 2 walls, the afternoon light coming through them and falling across a wooden floor that was paint-stained in ways that had been there long enough to become part of the floor's character rather than marks on its surface. Shelves along one wall holding supplies, brushes, tubes of paint, jars of things I could not identify, all of it organized with the precision of someone who knew exactly where everything was. An easel in the corner, empty. A work table in the center, cleared but with the particular quality of a surface that had held many things, and remembered all of them. It smelled like paint and something else, something older and warmer underneath. "Junho's," I said quietly. Not a question. He nodded. "He was an architect," I said, "but he painted too." "On weekends," Martin said. He said building things and painting things use different parts of his brain, and he needed both to feel balanced. I looked at the shelves, at the paint-stained floor, at the easel in the corner standing empty and patient. "You kept it exactly as it was," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I could not think of a reason to change it," he said. And then, more quietly, "I could not think of a reason to come up here either, until recently." I looked at him. He was looking at the windows, at the afternoon light coming through them the way it must have come through them every Saturday afternoon for years, falling on a floor that remembered someone who was not here anymore. He brought me up here, I thought. He unlocked the room downstairs and left the photograph, and now he brought me up here. He is showing me the parts of the house he closed. He is opening them again, one at a time, carefully, the way you open something that has been shut for a long time and you're not entirely sure what the air inside will feel like when it gets out. We went through the rest of the house after that. The East Corridor, his archive, decades of work, organized in a system so precise it had its own index, the thing he had built his life around after everything else was closed. The locked rooms on the 2nd floor, a music room, a dining room that had not been used for formal dinners since before Mrs. Adela's time, a sitting room with furniture so old it had become historically significant without anyone planning for that outcome. And at every room he told me something, not a lot. Martin did not do a lot at once, but something, a memory attached to a piece of furniture, a story about the house before he came to it. Small pieces of a life, offered carefully, one at a time, like someone learning again how to give things away. By the time we got back to the ground floor, the afternoon had become evening, and Mrs. Adela had appeared in the kitchen with food for 2 without being asked, which told me she had known about the Saturday plan before I did and had opinions about it that she was expressing through the medium of feeding people. We ate in the kitchen, the 3 of us, which had never happened before. It had always been me and Mrs. Adela while Martin was elsewhere, or me and Martin in passing, never all 3 of us around the same table at the same time. It was ordinary in a way that felt extraordinary. Mrs. Adela talked, I talked. Martin said less, but listened with the focused attention of someone who found the activity of people talking around a table genuinely interesting rather than merely tolerable. At one point he disagreed with something Mrs. Adela said about the history of the East Wing, and they had a brief precise argument about it that I watched with the delighted attention of someone witnessing something rare, because I had never seen Martin argue with anyone before, and it turned out he did it with the same controlled precision he did everything, except underneath the precision there was something almost playful, just barely, just enough to be visible if you were paying attention. I was paying attention. I was always paying attention. I was still paying attention at 8:30 that evening when a car stopped on the street outside and Mrs. Adela went to the window and her expression did the thing it did when she was deciding to be calm about something. "He is here," she said. Martin set down his cup. His expression did not change, but something shifted underneath it, the way things shift underneath surfaces when the surface is holding something still, and he stood up with the particular deliberateness of someone who has been expecting something and has decided how they are going to meet it. "Send him in," he said. I looked at Mrs. Adela. "Vincent," she said quietly. And then to Martin. "Do you want Tony to—" "No," Martin said. "He can stay." I want you to understand what those 3 words meant. After weeks of a house with rules and locked corridors and things that were not mine to know, after east wings and 3rd floors and letters with symbols pressed into dark wax, after all of it, he can stay. I stayed. Vincent came through the kitchen door, and he was exactly as I remembered him from the season 1 evening that felt like a different life now, silver-haired, sharp-featured, eyes that assessed everything in the room in the first 2 seconds and filed it all away. He looked at Mrs. Adela, he looked at me, he looked at Martin, and then he pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table like he had sat at it before, which he probably had, and said, "You look different." Martin sat back down. "I look the same," he said. "You look different," Vincent said again. And then he looked at me, not unkindly, with the eyes of someone who had known Martin for long enough to understand exactly what different meant and where it had come from. "I am going to tell you something," he said to me, "and I need you to understand that I am not saying it to frighten you or to warn you away. I am saying it because you deserve to know what you are walking toward with full knowledge rather than half of it." I looked at Martin. Martin was looking at Vincent with an expression that was not quite permission and not quite resignation, but somewhere in between. The expression of someone who has decided that the truth is going to come out one way or another and has chosen to let it come out cleanly. "Tell him," Martin said quietly. And Vincent told me everything, not just Junho, all of it. Martin at 26, before the mansion, before the legend, before any of this, what he had been like. And Vincent described it with the careful honesty of someone who had known a person in 2 completely different versions of themselves and loved both and grieved the distance between them. "Warm," Vincent said, which was a word I had never associated with Martin and which landed somewhere in my chest with a weight I was not prepared for. Warm and precise and quietly funny and completely certain about the things he loved and the person he had chosen. And then the accident, and then the closing, and then the years of Vincent trying to reach him and finding only the legend, which was not a wall exactly, but was something that functioned like one, and eventually accepting that the wall was what Martin needed, and stepping back, because sometimes love means stepping back even when everything in you wants to push forward. And then you, Vincent said to me. He looked at me steadily. In 31 years, since I have known him, I have never seen him unlock a room for anyone. The kitchen was very quiet. I looked at Martin. He was looking at the table. His jaw was set in the way it got when something was costing him something, and he was deciding not to show how much. I thought about everything I had believed about this place when I first arrived. The gate, the lights, the legend, the most feared man in the city. I thought about instant noodles and a rusty laugh, a photograph left unlocked, a studio with paint-stained floors and afternoon light. He can stay. I thought about how a person builds a wall high enough that the whole city decides it must be a monster inside, and how the wall is not a lie exactly. It is just a very effective way of making sure nobody comes close enough to find out the truth. And I thought about the fact that I had come close enough, not because I was brave. I was not brave. I was broke and desperate, and I had nowhere else to go, and I came back every evening because the rent was paid and because something underneath all my fear kept pulling me toward this place and this person in a way I had not understood and was only now beginning to. Vincent stood up to leave at 9:30. He shook Mrs. Adela's hand and nodded at me and stood in front of Martin for a moment, and something passed between them that was old and complicated and not mine to fully understand. The kind of thing that lives between people who have known each other across decades of loss and change and still chosen to remain in each other's lives despite everything. He said something to Martin quietly, too quiet for me to hear. Martin listened, and then Vincent left, and his footsteps went down the hallway, and the front door closed, and the house settled back into its quiet. Martin stood by the kitchen window for a moment. Then he turned around, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded I had ever seen it. Not broken, not devastated, just open. Like something that had been held very tightly for a very long time had finally been set down. Like a person who had been standing in the cold for so long they had forgotten what warmth felt like and had just unexpectedly stepped into it. I looked at him across the kitchen table. He looked back at me, and neither of us said anything yet. But something had been decided. I could feel it in the room, the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives, in the pressure of the air, in the particular quality of the silence. Something had been decided, and we both knew it, and the only thing left was to find the words for it. That was going to be a different evening, but it was coming. I could feel it coming the whole walk home.